will introduce ourselves in a second, but I would also like to say hello to our other user group leaders, which is Jacob and Bart, that Bart just joined us. So maybe, Jacob, you could introduce yourself first.
Yeah, sure. Hello, guys. This is Jakub. I work as a BI developer in medical industry, and I really look forward for today's presentation of Mark and Emil. The voice is yours, Bart.
Hi everyone. Sorry for being late. I had a other call right now. I'm very happy to be here. As Emil mentioned, I'm co-founding this user group for more than 2 years right now, and I would like to warmly welcome Mark. He's a great expert, and I'm looking forward to see that presentation. Thank you very much.
So, hi Mark. Would you like to? I will share the screen, and maybe we can go first with the agenda. But before we will do that, can you say if I'm actually sharing the screen?
Yes, I see the agenda. Makes it easier for me to not have to try to remember it. We will have an introduction. If you don't know who I am, that's perfectly acceptable. I'm just Mark. But in the community, I'm Marquis Crew. We're going to talk to you today about things that you can do to up your Alteryx game. And in doing that, we're going to present good ways to do things, but a way to think about things so that it's easier and more powerful dynamic to be able to do things in the future. Vacation proofing your workflow, how to go and make sure that you're able to attend the meeting and not watch Alteryx, or go to the beach with your family and not get the phone call that takes you back. No one workflow is the right thing for everybody, not the way. There's so many ways to use Alteryx. You need to develop this into your own flavor and brand. What we're going to recommend to you is don't just think I've got the answer and start building, that you're going to think about your problem more. So ready, fire, aim. It'll work some of the time, but if you want it to be better, aim before you fire. And then whatever you're learning yourself, make sure you've got an audience to share with, because when you share with other people, you get feedback and you come up with something better. So 1 + 1 = 3. And then we've got some takeaways for you.
Thank you. And one thing from my side, we will do our best to make this session a little bit more interactive, but for now, we will introduce ourselves, and Mark will go first.
Yeah, so I'm not quite sure why I put I'm Amsterdam upside down, but I get up very early in the morning when I'm traveling, and I'm able to get out to visit spots before the crowds show up. I also have time in my day to spend with grandkids and family, and I do that because I am able to separate some of this work and friends. I know, Chris, you've got your imaginary friends that you like to hang out with, but I don't have such a big friend group, so I have to rely on little kids that like ice cream to be with me. When I'm not doing Alteryx-y things in community, I'm thinking up new things to do for Chaos Reigns within the crew macros, come up with things that would be useful to people. At home, I've got 6 poodles and 3 cats. I could tell you all of their names, but then I'd have to test you on it at the end of the call. I'm an Alteryx partner, and if you ever need to reach me, you can find me in community as Marquis Crew.
Thank you, Mark. And maybe one more addition. This is the presentation that we conducted in Amsterdam, so that's definitely one of the reasons that Amsterdam is shown on the picture, but I also don't know why it's upside down. So let me quickly introduce myself. My name is Emil, and we have here a picture of me being more professional. Here we have a picture with me with my lovely wife waiting for a concert of Imagine Dragons. If you have a chance in the future to attend one of those, Imagine Dragons really know how to do a great show. Really, you will enjoy it. And this is the picture of me celebrating Alteryx community birthday. We had this during our event, I think the last maybe 2 years ago. I'm not sure because of the COVID, but it was really fun event, and we need to repeat that in the future. And I'm very happy that we have here Mark. Mark Ikru is really a legend in the Alteryx field. And I'm very happy that I had the opportunity to present in front of people alongside with him. But few words about me and Alteryx. Alteryx was a game changer for myself. Basically my life was really tough before I learned Alteryx because I was heavy Excel user and I needed to invest a lot of time in doing stupid manual tasks that I would prefer to never do in my life, and Alteryx allowed me to automate them and make my life much more enjoyable. Because I spent so much time with the Alteryx, I spent a lot of time helping others on the official Alteryx community, and I will cover that in a second. I was recognized as an ACE during the last year, and this is a great privilege for me as well. And also with Bart, that is here with us on the call, we co-founded a company called DataPal. So if you need any Alteryx help in the future, you will know where to find us. Basically, we would like also to cover the part about the Alteryx community, because the Alteryx community is very important for all of the ACEs. Like, we spend a lot of time there answering other people's questions, learning from each other, reading about the Alteryx. Basically, if you are interested in upskilling, you definitely should spend more time on the Alteryx community. And Alteryx ACEs have always been an inspiration for me. And we got here Mark, and we got here Chris McLeavy, and those two people, those are the only people that I actually remember from my early stage when I was starting with the Alteryx. So I'm happy that both of them joined our call today. And Alteryx community was a great opportunity for me to learn how to solve problems, because those what consultants do, and I really wanted to become a consultant. So that's also the reason why I spend a lot of time on the official Alteryx community, because this is a great way to become better at solving problems. And also, I covered that already, it's a great opportunity to upskill yourself, learn from others, and the ultimate benefits, it feels really good to help others. Like, if you know that you saved someone X amount of time and they, are happy with the solution that you provided with them, or maybe you help them with showing them the direction, it can really feel good if you help others. So.
Yeah, I learned a lot about Alteryx by helping people in community to pick up skills and things, example spatial or regex, to go and learn regular expressions. I saw Adam Riley answer a post and I was like, wow, it took me so many tools to do that, and you could do it so simply in this regular expression. Now I kind of feel the other way around. Sometimes it's better to write all those tools out than to use the simple regular expression. But by figuring out how to do it myself and then how to communicate that to somebody else and teach them, that really reinforces the learning, and you get better at it by helping other people. So it felt good to help other people, true, but it really felt good to learn it solidly for myself. So
yeah, Yeah, I agree. Regarding the regex, I would strongly recommend actually searching in the internet when you have a problem instead of actually investing a couple of days to learn it properly. But it's a really great skill to have. It's like a superpower. So maybe, Mark, you can say a few words about how ACEs are approaching problems and solving problems.
Absolutely. The first thing to do is to answer your boss or answer your client where they want something fast. Hey, what's the answer to this? And in the Grand Prix, it's all about speed to the solution. But speed itself and a solution doesn't necessarily mean that it's right. So whatever you're doing, you need to, before you communicate done, there has to be some review of is it done correctly. And in that getting it done correctly, the one time might not work the next time through. So you need to think in terms of, is this fragile, or will it actually be able to run if I close Alteryx and reopen it again, or if I reconnect to the data? And if you're going back to the beach theme here, if I give this workflow to somebody else, it's going to work for them, because that's the worst, is to have somebody else come back to me and say, hey, I was trying to do this and wow, I didn't think you'd ever try doing that. and now I have to go out of what I'm doing today and go back to something that I worked on yesterday or 6 months ago. So if you've got something, you've got to think in terms of, my brand is at stake when I give this answer. So solve the problem or challenge in a way that you can put it on the shelf and not worry about it. And to that end, how I solve the challenge, how you solve the challenge, they don't have to be the same. Take a look at the weekly challenges themselves. There's so many different ways to solve it. We don't all just say, oh, I'll be kind to you, Chris. Chris solved it. I like the way Chris solved it. I'll just copy his answer. We try to be unique.
Yeah, I think what is important here is like just to having an understanding that usually we just want to do, you just want to do it once and see if it's working correctly, and later, after finishing the task, after having an understanding actually if the workflow provides us with the correct output, we can focus on improving it and make it more flexible or more bulletproof or more dynamized, depending on the situation. And depending also how important the process is for us. If we are working on the one-off project, we will not invest a lot of time in order to make it working flawlessly when we are on the vacation.
You know, and to that point, this morning I had a call with a client. I was working on a process. There are roughly 3 billion transactions that I have to summarize 7 different ways. And it was taking quite a while and using up a bunch of disk to run that 3 billion record transaction. And I was noticing that what worked with 1 million records quickly, when it's 3 billion with a B records, there is a join that was really consuming Alteryx. So I switched that to a find and replace. And essentially, I've got 60 records joining to 3 billion records, but I was turning the 3 billion records on end to resort the 3 billion records. And so I used the find and replace, and it's already past where I had stopped the previous workflow. So you're going to constantly be finding yourself in a tweaking mode.
Yeah, I think usually people don't work with such amount of data as you, Mark, but it's also important to just observe your workflow and see where your problems are showing. So, and this is Mark with Debra in the Inspire. Like she's a comedian and she has a really good podcast. So if you like to have fun and you enjoy the podcasts, we recommend to checking her out.
And that was also me 34 kilos ago. So
That's impressive.
Really nice transformation, Mark.
thank you very much. Have a chin again.
So now I will say a few words about approaching the problems, approaching the challenges that we have as developers, as Alteryx users. First of all, it is important to figure out that actually we have a problem to solve. Like we have a problem with our process. For example, we have a process that we are running, but on each run, we need to change the date, the name of the month, or maybe we change the regions or I don't know, country, and we are doing some manual adjustments in the workflow. Some of the people wouldn't be bored about it. They wouldn't bother and they would just do it. But for a lot of us, this is a big problem. This is something that will become a bottleneck sooner or later. That's, you cannot schedule that on the Alteryx server because this will not work properly because you need to change the workflow each time. So do we truly understand what the challenge is? Sometimes we think that the problem is maybe in the data quality issue in the database, but maybe the problem is deeper and we have a problem in the process overall because the end user can put into the database every value that he would like to have instead of having, for example, a dropdown or a field with some kind of restrictions. So sometimes we might recognize a problem, but the true problem is somewhere else. And the third point, which in my opinion is very important and it's highly depends how much time I spend on the workflow. If I need to solve a problem only once, I will not invest, or maybe sometimes I will, but not always. But if I know that the workflow will run on daily, weekly, or just regular basis, and it's really important for a business, then I would need to spend a lot of time to make sure that it's bulletproof, that it's well documented, that it's working dynamically without me changing anything in the Excel file or in the workflow itself. So this is a really important question that we should ask us ourselves when we are working with the workflows. And especially, I think also this is when you are communicating with other people, you need to also mention that okay, I have solved the problem, the workflow is working, but if it will be a regular process, I will need to have some additional time to polish it, to make it just better. So I think this is a very common problem from my experience, that people are saying that they solved the challenge, that the workflow is working, but if it will work next month, that's uncertain. So yeah, sometimes after finishing the workflow, you need to spend a lot of time in order to make it better. The next question is, do you know your data? So Mark is usually working with huge data sets that required super heavy NASA PC, but usually probably people don't work with such amount of data. But quite often I think people don't spend enough time in investigating the data and getting understanding of it. So if you receive a new data set, before actually jumping into a problem problem solution mode, you should spend the time to actually take a look at the data, see where are the data gaps, see if the data seems valid, if you have any major data quality issues. Those things should be discovered before investing a lot of time in working on the workflow. And the last point, can you prepare for the next unknown challenge? We will cover that in a second, I think, not on the next slide, but in a second. But this is a really important point that I think is crucial if you are working with Alteryx server, and it's distinguish you from other developers. If you will be able to prepare the workflow to make it bulletproof, you will be far way on the Alteryx journey than the usual Alteryx user. Sorry, Mike, you wanted to say something.
You can't, the unknown challenge, you can't underestimate that. And we're going to hit on this a couple of times. If you make a list, at least, of your assumptions about the data, you could probably test for those things. I'm not going to get duplicate keys. I won't get empty or no values in this field, that dates will conform to a specific format or will have certain delimiters in them. If something can go wrong with the data, it can go wrong, it will go wrong. And if you're not prepared for it, that could interrupt your vacation. So think about that with your data, that what did I make as an assumption that I don't realize that I did, because that's what's going to get you.
Yeah. I think the common approach, which I always recommend doing, is it's related to unknown challenge, but it's just related to it. So if you have an issue with your workflow, a problem, I don't know, the workflow stopped running because of database, or maybe your workflow didn't work properly because there was something that you didn't predict it. Each time I would strongly recommend documenting incidents like that, and always prepare or correct your workflow in a way to prevent this from happening in the future. Because I think for preparation for the unknown challenge, that requires a lot of knowledge and a lot of experience, but you can also bring a lot more value to the organization if you actually solve the problems that you encounter in the past. Like if you see that your workflow stopped working because of the, I don't know, typo in Excel file, then you need to ensure that your workflow will not fail for the similar issue in the future. And now we will talk about containers, macros, and other things that will allow us to make the workflow more reusable. So Mark, could you cover that?
Yeah, when you're, and again, I didn't like building macros. So if you can get away with not creating a macro, better. If I do create something that's a macro, or if I see in a workflow something where I see the same logic repeated multiple times, it does make me think, boy, that should be a macro. And Alteryx is moving forward at making things easier to create macros with containers, and you can click on it and turn it into a macro. They've just released control containers. I think control containers is a way to box in your logic, and with control containers, you can avoid things like batch macros potentially with control containers. But if I'm going to invest the time in building a macro, I'm going to invest the time in testing it and future testing the macro. and then it's got to be reusable. So if I put too much into the macro to make it not reusable, then I'm going to have to go and have 2 or 3 macros that each do something very similar. And so what you want to do is you want to make sure that you've got something that's reusable. That makes it worth the effort. And then you need to have something that's testable. Hey, I need to be able to make sure this works with the new version of Alteryx. Think about that, because this is technical debt that you're getting into. You're now creating something that you need to verify in the future that it still works. And sometimes you want 2 or 3 macros. That way, each one does their own independent thing. And I kind of like Legos. You need certain shaped Legos, but you can put them together in a way that makes it easier to work. So, so don't think about the macro as I'll just build something and then it'll become this macro. Put some thought into what am I going to do and how am I going to put this together so that it'll work today and I can use it on other projects that I'm working on. And I put out there a comment asking the audience, by the way, to participate. You're participants in this meeting. So if you did have questions, like Kevin just posted a question about macros and what macros are. Macros themselves are tools that you've configured. Example, take your data and take your price and your quantity and create a total purchase price. If you find yourself writing that formula over and over, and you're not only doing it on price times quantity of one item, but you've got to go and do it for a whole array of items that you've got. Instead of trying to write all these individual formulas, you could just create a macro that creates all these different formulas for you off of your data, and it would just read in your data and do 17 calculations for you. And those 17 calculations that it's doing for you are the same for every time you run and for anyone else who's got to do similar things. So what you're doing is you're taking a set of tools and their function, and you're making that reusable by the team. So I do appreciate the question, and if you have more of those, we'll try to go and be attentive to answering those while we go through the responses and presentation.
Yeah, I'm not seeing the chat, but Mark, if you could monitor that, that would be amazing. But I have a question to you, Mark, because you have mentioned that when you are using macros, you also need to ensure that they will work in the future Alteryx releases. Did you have a situation in which your macro stopped working on the newer version?
Well, I'll give you a crew macro that doesn't work. The parallel block until done does not work with AMP turned on.
Okay.
There's no way I'm going to think about that back in the early 2000s when it was written. So, so it doesn't work. And so that's, if you've got parallel block until done, you really don't need it now that you've got control containers, but any workflows that you have that have parallel block until done in them, if you turn AMP on, you're not going to get the effect of parallel block until done. You need to change that. And I think that there is a note that we put out onto crew about that. So generally speaking, if I'm at a client engagement and I've got to upgrade, one of the things I'm going to do is say, where are your macros that you've got and what plans do you have to test them on the newest release, because it can happen. If you read the release notes, they may have removed a tool or changed functionality. There have been some times where Alteryx will change the behavior of something that was an error to become a warning, or warnings could become errors, or things. If you do a division by 0 in Alteryx, do you know what you get?
Not really.
Nothing. Nothing. It'll give you a null value. It doesn't give you a warning or an error. If you do this in Excel, you get the, hey, there's a problem. It doesn't like division by 0. And so Alteryx has never thrown errors on division by 0, which is something you need to think about. Hey, I'm doing division by a number and I can't trust there's always going to be a good value in there. What do I want to do if there's a division by 0? Hint, do something in that case. But if in the next release of Alteryx they start throwing errors, you never even knew that you were doing a division by 0, and now all of a sudden you could be getting loads of errors in your workflows.
Okay, I didn't thought about that previously. Thank you for sharing.
You're welcome. That's why I'm old and you're not.
That's very helpful. And actually, I can think about a situation that is happening in real life. So maybe I will use that in the future.
Okay.
And did we cover everything on these slides? I apologize if I moved too fast.
Oh, no. We could spend a whole presentation on that one slide.
Okay.
Ask Sean Adams. He talks about that all the time.
Yeah, so maybe we can split the slides. I will cover 2 first. Regarding documentation and the best practices in this area. So spend a little bit of time each time when you're actually working with the Alteryx to document your workflow, because Alteryx is pretty good in documenting itself, but at the same time, you can make the documentation much better, much more appealing, and much easier to understand if you will spend some additional time on making the documentation a little bit more clear. And remember that the documentation that you are doing, it's not only for you. It's not only for your colleagues. It's also for your colleagues, because you can be out of the office and someone else needs to pick up your work. But at the same time, trust me, if I am finishing my work on Friday, on Monday I can forget what I was doing in the workflow, what was the last step that I have done before the weekend. And actually I have a really good practice. I'm just putting a red container on the last tool that I added into the workflow, and I'm adding a comment, what I was doing and what I need to do. So it's really easy for me to pick up my own work. But also after 6 months, after I have finished the workflow and I would like to revisit it, documentation is a blessing. And also simplify your workflow. If you finished your workflow, make your workflow a little bit easier, polish it, remove unnecessary tools, maybe disable browse tools if you don't need them, or maybe remove them at all if you think you will not ever need them in the future. Maybe some of the tools you can put into a container and disable the container and hide them. Some of them just delete. Make your life a little bit easier, because when we are brainstorming, when we are solving problems, we can put a lot of different tools, especially if something isn't working and we are investigating some kind of issue. But later, probably it's better to remove them. Yes? I was thinking, Mark, you would like to.
Oh yeah, I was reading the comments in there. So yeah, Excel doesn't really help you in this area much. But so I'm building a workflow, and example if you put a union tool onto the workflow, does anyone know what the default is for the configuration options around missing fields or fields not aligning in the union?
I know.
You know, okay, but so I'm looking for the next option in order. Now, what happens if they're different? What happens if the names aren't the same for the columns, or there's a column missing?
So usually we are getting the warning message.
Warning messages. Okay. Who cares about a warning? It's either write or ignore it. I need the data to be perfect, or I don't care. I don't need the warning messages. I don't need the conversion messages. I had 700 warning messages, or I have all these warning messages, and somewhere buried in there, it could be that the value for a field doesn't fit into the field, and now you've truncated data or something like that. That could be relatively important. And if it's in the warnings, you want to build a workflow that has 0 expected warnings. You
It's
will
tough.
find, trust me on that if you've got warnings and you do a code review with me, that's going to be the first thing I ask you about, because I don't think you're ready for the code review.
Of course, I'm just saying that I think sometimes it's really tough. Like I am doing that as well, but I know why people are skipping this point, because it's really time consuming to clear some of them.
Yeah, well, get ready, fire, aim, or ready, aim, fire. You've got, and they're doing things. If you complain in the ideas forum, gosh, I want to get rid of all of the forget all missing fields. And not just do it on one tool, but do it on all the tools, because I don't want all those warning messages. There we go, division by 0. Hey, this is something that I'm warning you about. If you're going to do a division by 0, you need to test the divisor and see if it's 0, and you need to have complete control about what to do. You're either going to stop the entire process, set the value to 0, don't let Alteryx make the decision to null it for you. So if you've written a regular expression and you spent the time building it and testing it, it's probably worthwhile to test the data to make sure that the format that you expected that the regular expression is going to work on is still that same format, that they didn't change it. And then don't edit your workflows each run. So if you need to change a value, figure a way to make it dynamic. So if I'm looking at the workflow and if you're testing it, I need to do something. If you're running it in production, I need to make a bunch of changes to put it into production. If somebody's got to put their fingers on the keyboard to be able to run something, there's a high likelihood that they'll forget to make the change, or they'll change it incorrectly, and you just don't have time to rerun and do that. Or me, I don't have I'm lazy. I want to do it right the first time. I don't want to have to come back to it again. So if you dynamize your workflow, which isn't a word, but it should be. If you dynamize the workflow, it just works. We're talking about things that you don't expect. If I'm building a macro, and again, back to the macros, it's really easy for me to use a field called record ID. What a bad idea that is. How many other sets of data might come in with the field name of record ID? I've learned from mistakes. Whenever I'm creating macro variables, and this goes back to learning how to program, I had working variables that were all W dash something, but I'll put double underscores in front of as a suffix and a prepend to the field name to know that I created this in the macro. Or maybe if you're data pal, you'll be DP underscore record ID. If you're going to build something and the data is transient in the workflow, but it looks awfully similar to another field, you're going to want to be able to control those. And if you did it with dynamic fields, at the very end, you could use a dynamic select and you could delete any fields, or deselect any fields that are DP underscore. You could, hey, just in case I slipped some of my working variables out, I could go and do something like that. It's just the technique itself is make sure that this is going to run in the future and it's not going to collide with things, but also to make sure that you don't do something sloppy and put out my stupid client, whatever, as a comment, and that it's going to make its way into production. I see you're smiling, maybe something.
I am smiling for two reasons. First of all, that was a really nice suggestion and a great tip to share that, if you are creating a new column that is not present in your initial data set, it's really good idea to actually be able to identify it later on. But what really is keeping me smiling is that we are really bad in making interactive sessions. So if anyone have any questions at this stage, please ask them. But
maybe this is not a question. Like, I just
Mhm.
wanted to share that I was doing the same before, and I was applying the same technique to Tableau, and I think it works great. Like, when you create some new columns, some new attributes, it's always good to mark this somehow. And for instance, adding a new character at the very beginning of this name is a great approach. And I really like that. Thanks, Mark, for sharing this.
Okay.
cool. And regarding cleaning the warnings, truly, I think this is underestimated, and usually when I'm working with new clients, the workflows are always full of warnings. And what is also important, very often I think why people don't use Alteryx very often is because it has learning curve. It's much easier to learn than Python, for example, but still you need to invest X amount of time to become quite good with it, to make your workflows working without any issues, without you changing anything all the time, or without you needed to rerun it because the workflow wasn't working correctly for certain reason. So yeah, it's good to be a person that actually spends time in making your workflow polished. Like after it's working, just invest the time to document it, to simplify the solution, to clean the warnings, test your data, and also dynamize your workflow. I think it's a quite tough because everyone is very busy and we have always plenty of responsibilities. We have new projects in front of us. But if we will not do this in future, we will not work on new cool projects. We will come back to our old processes which we don't like anymore because we would like to work on new exciting things, and instead of correcting our, let's say, historical debt.
Let's
Mark,
stick on
Emil,
the slide.
I believe there is one more question on the chat,
Okay.
and it is related to the cleaning the warnings. And I'm curious as well regarding your response. So what about the unions, for instance, and the warnings? I know that you can change the settings, the configuration for union tool to don't show the warnings, but how you clean, how do you approach such cases?
Well, if I know that I've got fields in the right data that aren't present in the left, I will just ignore the warnings. But what you can do is say in the process, I may have these fields, but I must have these fields. Then you could go and use two separate unions, to have a union followed by another union, and say, okay, once I come through the first union, if I don't have the exact fields that I'm looking for, and you put in a text input tool or something, here above it, you see me drawing, and it's got to have these fields. So you put the optional ones in first, get your result, and then you test it against a template. And now at the end of that union, if these required ones aren't there, you fail.
Yeah.
And fail early. But again, if you're documenting the workflow and you're simplifying it and you're cleaning the warnings, trust me on this, the do your test data is not its own action item. You've already tested when you're documenting and simplifying, and you've thought about these things. So they all work together. So you don't have 5 things to do. You are doing them together, and they complement each other.
Thanks for that response.
Yeah, I would also add, like, what I really like to do if I would use ignore on unions at some stages of the workflow, or I'm just still in the development phase. Actually, I would always do that. At the end of the workflow, I always use the summarize tool. In case if something is missing, in case of any crucial column isn't there, I will always get an error message, because in the summarize column, I don't have a proper column, which in my opinion is really good practice, and it's really easy to implement, and you have added benefit. You remove duplicate positions if you had any at the end of your workflow. So that's a
there
quick
is
tip.
a question that just came in. It's an interesting question. I would ask Chris first. Chris, have you seen cases where a workflow is running and you don't want another workflow to run?
Well, the answer is the server, isn't it? But if you have so that's what the server's for. This is for your sort of governance and control. But if you are using the designer and you're running this from a flat file YXMD, it's an interesting one. I mean, I can't see how you could.
So the way I would handle it is there are events that you could run, and before you run, you could say copy a file or a name and say in the shared directory, my workflow is running is true. And
so
then,
what I was gonna say was a similar sort of thing. You could drop a text file into a polling directory, and the text file is effectively a flag that says this is currently in use. And at the end of the run, you just delete the text file. What you would have there is, as you said, Mark, an event that goes and says, if this is here, just stop the workflow.
Yeah. And the thing that is going to get you on that, I mean, because it's a hack, and hacks are good, is if somebody cancels it and you don't clean up that message, then nobody can run again until somebody gets in there to clean it. But sometimes you're going to have to think outside of the box. What can I do to And so you could do something like that. So, okay, it was just
in fact, Mark, this is actually a good example that you could actually use a control container, because that's going to actually allow you to run things in sequence. And if you actually put this in to begin with, right at the beginning of your workflow, to check to see whether the file exists or not, effectively the first tool is then going to say, can I go any further?
And so what Chris just did unconsciously or consciously is we talked about a code review. Hey, I've got this function. How should I do it? I tried it this way. And Chris said, oh, you should try it this way. And so that's an example where you ask the question to a peer or to community if you don't have a peer, and you get a better result. Thank you, Chris.
You're welcome, Mark, anytime.
Okay.
Now I have a question, because I think we have 5 minutes left and we have still a couple of slides to cover. And we have also Alteryx workflows to show. So maybe we'll jump to the workflows. What do you think, Mark?
Yeah, I think it is a good idea right now. And if that's okay, maybe we could extend that meeting for a few minutes.
Or I can come back and we can dig into more detail about it. But I hope that the concept that we've given you so far is able to at least enlighten you to doing things a different way.
So I like the idea as well. Maybe we can just discuss now and we can do similar session in the future. So do we have other questions which we didn't cover yet? Multiple runs. Regarding multiple runs, what I also like to do is, I think Chris mentioned something very similar. By checking, I'm using directory tool to check if the file was created or not, or very often I am using the directory tool to check if my output file have been created. Depends on the situation.
I create metric files often when I'm running. And what I'll do dynamically is say I'm downloading data from AWS. I want to download data that I haven't downloaded before. If I'm extracting the data out of what I've downloaded from AWS, I want to look to see, have I already extracted it? I don't want to extract it again. Have I processed the data? I have these double checks to other metrics that I'm doing, and I have the ability to go back to a client and say, I've processed, I did all of this work. And it's all there in these metric breadcrumbs that I've left, and I can then write a workflow that reads in these little tiny metric files. They're generally like one row a piece with 2 or 3 columns of data. And I can go back and justify the process or say, hey, it's weird. I only got 10 records, but I was expecting a much bigger number, and be able to actually look at the data. It's not that it just ran. I have an easy way to go and quantify the runs and potentially create new quality metrics in the process.
Yeah, so basically you are referring to some kind of log files that you create when running the workflows. Is that correct?
You know, they're very specific log files, because I don't care about all the messages that are in the log. I need to know how many files were read, how many were written. And I'm sorry for using the Lord's name in vain there, but God forbid that read and written don't foot to each other. There isn't a, you know, if in your join all of a sudden 10 records became 100, it might not become apparent. But if something's going wrong and I'm dropping data or generating data in the process, it's a safety net to say, is it really reasonable that the United States only has 1,000 people in it?
Yeah, it's good to check your data quality afterwards. And like creating automated checks is really important if you are using the server. If we are not, we can figure out a lot of problems when running the workflow, but after scheduling it, you will never see the warning messages. You might not see that your file wasn't generated, and you might not have a clue that it wasn't generated. And what can be not funny for you is that you, for example, expect to finish your work now, spend more time with your family, for example, but someone is coming back to knock, knock, where is my report? Where is my data? Where is something that you should deliver? And it's not there. And it wasn't there for a couple of hours, but because you didn't have any checks along the way, you didn't even know about it.
Okay. I like the idea. Chris has extended an invitation to us to continue into his user group meeting. So, Chris, I recommend that you post the link for that with the team here and get people to join into that, and I'll make it work on my end to be able to be there. Thank you for having me here today.
Sure, Mark. So thank you very much, guys, for joining, and girls as well. It was a pleasure to have so many Alteryx fans here, and see you next time. We will continue our session probably in near future.
Cheers.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.